But first, let's get into some big news dropping this morning. The Olympic roster for the U.S. men's national team has dropped. Here is a look at the names that comprise this 18-man roster, starting with the goalkeepers and defenders: Patrick Schulte, Gaga Slonina, John Tolkien, Caleb Wiley, Walker Zimmerman, one of the overage players that'll be used. Let's move it on over to the midfield. Gianluca Busio, Benjamin Kremaski, Jack McGlynn, Georgi Mihailovic. That's a nice addition. He is also an overage player that they'll be bringing along, and Tanner Tessman included there as well. And then up top, we've got Paxton Aronson, Taylor Booth, Duncan McGuire, Kevin Paredes, and Griffin Yao. So here we go. It's all happening. Tony, initial reactions to the names on this list?
Not a ton of surprises here. Obviously, we'll talk about Diego Luna, who's the big one that got left out. But I think if Marko Mitrovic had his way, he probably would have brought a number 9 as one of the overage players. But Ricardo Pepi not available. Haji Wright, I know they were trying late to try and get him, and he's not available. So they go with Georgi Mihailovic. I don't think any surprise with Miles Robinson and Walker Zimmerman. This team is fairly light in the center back position, so he tries to shore that up. That's going to be really important for him. And so not a ton of surprises here, I don't think. Although there's always whenever you pick a roster, there's always a conversation about who got left out,
especially with 18.
Well, I don't think anyone got left out outside of Diego Luna. I think more importantly, it's players that weren't released. So you look at this roster, and I think a majority of these guys might not even make the team, let alone be in the 18, just because of the players that are available of age, let alone the 3 overage players that they probably would have liked to bring, the ideal 3 overage players. But you could clearly see not too many players were released to play in this tournament. And the one thing that I look at when I'm looking at this is the lack of pace, especially in midfield. So you're going to probably need to play with 2 defensive midfielders or 2 deep-lying midfielders because you don't have the pace of someone who can cover all that ground. So it's going to be probably a pretty defensive lineup.
I have a question for you that play the Olympics. There's always a process, right? Mitrovic has had a process with a lot of these players in the project going forward. And then come Olympics, it feels like the makeup of a national team could change significantly, especially with the U.S. that has so many available players, like top-line players that would be starters on our national team could also play for the Olympics. They would be Olympic eligible. How much does that throw a wrench into the whole process when suddenly, you made the tournament, you qualified for the tournament that you were aspiring to qualify to, but then it's a completely different team, or at least enough changes where it might change the makeup and the look and the feel of the team.
Well, you go into the camp knowing that could happen, but all the way throughout the process, you're trying to impress Marko Mitrovic. You want to show that you want to be a part of it, even when the European players can come into the picture. Because in qualifying, which they didn't have to qualify this time because the U20s played a role in qualifying for the Olympics, but before this cycle, you'd have to go through qualifying, and most of those players were domestic players. The European players don't come in until the end. And so then you're thinking, okay, am I going to keep my spot? And you have to, it depends on how well you're playing. And for the most part, players would get released back then. These are all the players who are age eligible. Probably the most disappointing if you're U.S.Soccer is Ricardo Pepi and Malik Tillman, but most likely Pepi, because this is a player who's at PSV, who's not playing, and Ernie Stewart, former U.S. international, 100 caps plus, who was the sporting director for U.S.Soccer, who knows the process, says, you know what? Our club stance is they're not allowed to go. And that's got to sting the most, because you're telling me you can't allow Ricardo Pepi to come to the Olympics when he's not even your first choice striker? That's a tough pill to swallow.
Tony, what are your thoughts on that, on clubs not releasing their players? Because for me, especially a Ricardo Pepi, who probably feels like he has a ton to prove, this could have been a big opportunity for him. And it feels like there should be more conversations between what would actually benefit the player
Well, we have the other side of the coin here with Miles Robinson, right? Where Pat Noonan said, look, I don't want to lose my center back for 8 weeks. And I think, and he told me in an interview prior to one of the games that he thinks U.S. Soccer did a disservice to his team. By taking Miles Robinson to Copa America, knowing that he probably wasn't going to get a lot of minutes, knowing that they wanted him for the Olympic team. But he said, I would never take away a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for one of my players. So there is the other side. But you can completely understand if a manager says, no, we're in Europe, we're going to preseason now, or we're in MLS halfway through the season, you say, I can't miss so-and-so player, right? He's important to my team, so I need to keep this player. So Pat Noonan is on one side of things, and Ernie Stewart is on the other side of things. The Ernie Stewart one, for me, I'm with Charlie. This one stings a little bit. Not only did he play for the national team, he understands the system. He understands where we are, how important the Olympics are. And by the way, that we really needed a number 9 in this group, right? So, there's a lot of, strikes against, what Ernie did. But he has absolutely 100% the right to do that.
He has the right to do it. But it
Stinks.
but this one, this one does not make sense for me as a former U.S. international and someone who worked at U.S. Soccer as well. You're telling me you couldn't say, you know what, the upside for Ricardo Pepi is for him to go and prove to himself that he can deliver at the world stage at the under 23.
Up his market value too.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's great for
100%.
PSV. They can either sell him or just say, hey, Luke de Jong's probably got 1 more year at this top level, or 2. Maybe he leaves to Saudi Arabia, maybe he stays, whatever it is. But it would only benefit PSV for Ricardo Pepi to go get minutes and play in a major competition.
Nico, who some of the players on this, who do you think is poised to maybe have a big showing in the Olympics?
I'd like to see Tanner Tessman do that.
Yeah.
We don't see a lot of Tanner Tessman because him playing at Venezia, it's a little bit more difficult to see him week in, week out. But from what we understand, his soccer IQ as a midfielder is growing, and it's becoming more important. And I think for this team, given everything that you guys said about the lack of pace in the midfield, it's going to be very important for him to offer that balance. I think he'll be one of those pillars in the midfield that can give a lot of structure to this national team. I hope to see that at the Olympics.
They're going to need structure. That's for sure. When you look at this team, used to be Cade Cowell was the one that would offer you that pace, the change of pace, especially coming out the bench. He's not here. So Kevin Paredes is the only player that I see from the midfielders all the way through the forwards that
can beat you in a race.
That has pace. That's it.
You think you could beat every single one of these players in a race?
I don't know. but what I do know is that for this team to be successful, they have to be organized. They got to be switched on for 90 minutes. There's not a player that can come off the bench and change the game in terms of giving you a different look. They're all kind of in the same type of bucket in terms of the pace, the ability. It's going to be a difficult challenge for this group. It's a young, inexperienced group, but the opportunity's there. I'm proud of these players to go out and represent the country in the Olympics. It's an incredible competition. I'm bummed they won't be going to the opening ceremony because that's where it really sets in and you feel you're part of something really unique. But at the same time, this is a tremendous opportunity for these young players, and the player that I'm kind of looking forward to seeing here is Kevin Paredes.
Yeah.
Given his pace and given that he's had some good moments in the Bundesliga. So,
Tone, how do you assess our goalkeeping situation with Patrick Schulte and Gaga?
I think they picked the best 2 goals. No arguments here. Best 2 for me. And watching, you remember I covered Chicago Fire when Gaga Slonina came up, and he was 17 years old, and I said then that I thought, and there was this big thing made about the fact that I compared his body style to Gigi Buffon and the way that he plays. And I'm not comparing those 2 goalkeepers because they are light years apart from each other. But I said then I thought that Gaga Slonina will play a role in the 2026 World Cup. And I still think that he will play a role in the World Cup. And I think this tournament, it's going to be interesting to see what they do because Patrick Schulte's playing really well right now, and he has for quite some time. And so this is a really interesting competition. Remember, last camp, Slonina was called in and he got injured right before camp, and the assumption was that he was going to be the starting goalkeeper, but he's not there, and Schulte plays well, so now you got a decision to make. But I think as far as picking the two best goalkeepers for this, we have the two, and I love the fact that for years we always thought we had to pick an overage player in the goalkeeping position because we weren't ready. We're ready with these two guys to play. So that's a positive for sure in this position.
Against France in the friendly from a couple months ago, it was Schulte in goal, wasn't it? Is that the camp that you were calling?
Yeah.
Because they played Japan also and they didn't get a good result, so I don't remember. But Schulte has had good looks in this position. I know Gaga's like the up and coming young future of the U.S. net type of goalkeeper, but it feels like sometimes Schulte shouldn't get overlooked because he's proven in international football too with Columbus Crew that he can get the job done.
So in terms of goalkeeping, which I think is the strength of this group, but also the center backs, I think Miles Robinson and Walker Zimmerman will pair well together.
They've been paired together before.
But in the
World Cup
Olympics,
qualifying.
I think this would kind of be something that Marko Mitrovic will be super pumped about in terms of defensive stability.
100%. All right, I want to dive into some of the snubs. We hit on it a little earlier, but Diego Luna was basically asked to be an alternate and declined that opportunity. And then this weekend in RSL's match against Atlanta United, he gets 3 assists and a goal. Tony, what do you make of not only the snub, but his sort of reaction to say, no, I'm not going to be an alternate, and then putting out a performance like this? Was this kind of a sticking it to them for not selecting me?
I certainly would think so, right? Look, as much as, and by the way, he did a great job in his post-game interview talking about this and talking about how now his focus is RSL, and yeah, he can dance. I don't know. Do you call that whatever you call that celebration?
It's like a sprinkler.
It's just a player with style, right? A player that gives you something different.
So between him or Esmir Berterovic, I would have thought we would have had one of those two players. Luna, for me, is ahead of Berterovic, right? But so if he can't go, maybe you bring a player that has that type of profile, if you will. And I've said all along, I thought Diego Luna should be on the Olympic team from the start of this cycle, and he's not here. And I'm okay with the fact that he said, you know what, I'm not here to be an alternate. I need to focus on my job and what I'm doing here with RSL. It's funny because if the phone actually rings, you wonder what the conversation will be. Like, do you go?
What does that mean to be an alternate? Can you kind of explain, Chuck, like how it works? Are you just basically on call?
You're on call
the whole tournament.
If there's an injury, you're on call.
Yeah.
But
you can stay with your club team. It's not like you travel with the team.
Right.
He wouldn't be just hanging out, kicking it
he could
France.
Theoretically be at the camp with them until the last minute, and then you go back to your club. But for me, it's a mind-blowing decision why Diego Luna is not included in this group when you look at the names because of his versatility. He can play in the wings, but he also can play as the number 10. So Georgi Mihailovic is there to play that, but that's what Diego Luna can play, and he was by far the best player at the Under-20 World Cup, by far. And they, for me, underperformed in the knockout game against Argentina, or was it Uruguay? It was Uruguay, where they could have progressed. And for me, this is a player that is so unique in his profile. And when you look at this group, he would be something that gives you a different look. And I'm disappointed that he's not in this team.